This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, August 27th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees. So our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We're working to help keep you informed about what's going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Mali's military junta, which staged a coup last week, has announced that it plans to release ousted President Ibrahim Boubacar Keita and aims to rule for 3 years as part of a transitional government. However, international observers fear instability in Mali could spread across West Africa and say a military-led rule isn't a way forward. VOA's Mariama Diallo spoke to international observers, and VOA's Salem Solomon spoke to former U.S. Ambassador to Mali, Vicki Huddleston.
After a coup that led to the resignation of Mali's president, the international community is watching closely and debating how best to help the West African country avoid collapse. Vicki Huddleston, a former U.S. ambassador to Mali, said the key is to support the Malian people in forming a government that is trusted and representative of the country's diversity.
We need a government of national unity led by an honest, not corrupt president that is acceptable to all of the Malians. And Malians, I think, have a tendency toward unity. And we have to get back to that. We have to listen to them, and we have to respect them.
The Malian soldiers who orchestrated the coup pledged to relinquish power and to organize general elections. Huddleston said the international community must hold them to that promise.
What the United States, France, European Union, and the AU with ECOWAS need to tell the military, you stand down or you will be fighting us. The military has to stand down. That cannot stand. But the most important thing is to get the military back into the barracks, whatever it takes.
International pressure has been swift. The African Union voted to suspend Mali's membership. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has condemned the mutiny and called for all parties to engage in dialogue. ECOWAS, the 15-member Economic Community of West African States, condemned the coup and sent a delegation of heads of state to try to broker a peaceful way forward. The moment is particularly perilous for West Africa, with hotly contested elections this year in Ivory Coast, Guinea, Ghana, and Burkina Faso. Jude Moore is a senior policy fellow at the Center for Global Development.
The stability of the region is really, really important. To see Mali fail and Mali fall when you have all of these events coming that might bring instability is worrisome for the regional group. And so that's why I think the response was so muscular.
Mass protests erupted earlier this year following a decision by Mali's constitutional court to overturn the results of parliamentary elections. Following Keita's ouster, some are holding out hope there is an opening for progress. Joe Shoyer is a resident representative for the UNDP in Mali.
As such, military coups are not the preferred way of dealing with crisis in a country. The UN, as you probably know, at the level of the Secretary General, has issued a statement also condemning the coup. And of course, potentially it has a very big impact that could go in both of two directions, really. It could get worse in terms of the trajectory of the country, but at the same time, a crisis is also an opportunity. Depending how this develops, perhaps it might turn out in the long term as something that might address some of the underlying reasons why the coup was actually seemed necessary by those that led to the event.
Leaders from the ECOWAS region have met with the military junta and failed to reach an agreement on transition. However, they hope that power will return to civilian control. With Mariama Diallo, Salem Solomon, VOA News, Washington.
After a spate of killings in Nigeria's South Kaduna state, Christian villages upset with the lack of security began standing up to Muslim attackers by establishing their own patrols. The lightly trained guards, armed with whistles and sticks, staff strategic spots to keep watch and announce any unusual movement in their communities. Timothy Obiezu reports from Kaduna State.
Wielding locally made weapons and sticks, the men in this village are putting their lives on the line to defend their community. In Kromin Masara, Augustine Y. Caesar is the village youth leader. He addresses the men preparing for their watch.
Mutane takwas abinda aka kashe mana a gona a sassare su a kashe su ba abinda gwamnati za ta ce.
In Kromi Masara, it's now normal for villagers to be on patrol. Yakubu Nuhu, a local village guard, says he managed to get his family to safety the night of the attack on August 6. Then he returned to join other men to protect the village. But he worries they're outnumbered and under-equipped.
Nasu ya sha karfi namu, ni wannan muna zuwa farauta ne da tare garinmu. So abin da ya sa na shiga juwalanti in yi taimako garinmu.
Dozens have been killed in villages throughout southern Kaduna in a recent ethno-religious uprising that started early last month. Nigerian authorities responded to the killings by beefing up security in the affected villages. But protesters in Abuja, Kaduna and Lagos who want justice for the victims are also accusing official security officers of sabotage and say they want them withdrawn from their villages. Bivan Magoni, a journalist whose village was attacked recently, led the protest in the capital city of Abuja.
Our people are just clerical and auxiliary staff in our own state. We are saying we've had enough. Stop killing our people. Divide our state. If you're not going to stop killing our people, then take away the security that you put in our place. Because the curfew is in place and our people get killed at night.
Retired Commissioner of Police and Security expert Lawrence Alobi says he worries about low confidence levels between the people and security officials.
Without the people, the security community only succeed through the people that they can be able to get information what is happening. Because some of these people even live amongst them, right? So I think that it is important that the security agency should be, like I said earlier, make themselves worthy for the trust of the citizens. Confidence building.
Over the weekend, 3 fielding communities in southern Kaduna signed a peace pact and want to establish a joint conflict resolution committee. But until then, local villagers like Yakubu Nuhu will remain vigilant. Timothy Obiezu for VOA News in southern Kaduna, northwest Nigeria.
320 doctors employed by Kenya's Nairobi County government are back on the job Thursday after striking for 6 days over slow salary payment and a lack of protective equipment needed to care for patients who may have contracted COVID-19. Thuranera Kaugiria, Nairobi County Secretary General of the Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union, says doctors agreed to return to work after signing an agreement with the county government that promises to pay doctors on the 5th day of every month, provide doctors with 2 isolation facilities in the event that they contract COVID-19, and equip doctors with adequate supplies of high-grade personal protective equipment. All of Africa has reached a very important milestone. The World Health Organization has declared that the entire continent is now free of the wild polio virus. VOA's Carol Pearson reports that this is a time for celebration, but not a time to rest.
It's taken decades and millions of health workers traveling by foot, boat, and any other way they had to immunize children from polio. Health workers have even braved conflict to prevent a horribly crippling disease.
We made tremendous progress working with community leaders, sometimes with military officials to help deliver vaccine, to reduce the number of children that were inaccessible due to conflict down to very, very small numbers.
20 years ago, African governments committed to eradicate polio. Since then, 9 billion oral polio vaccines have prevented nearly 2 million cases of wild polio virus on the continent, according to the World Health Organization.
It took a lot of effort from many leaders, traditional leaders, religious leaders, and families, as well as volunteers and health workers, who came together to make this tremendous feat possible.
The Global Polio Eradication Initiative provided funding and logistical support. This partnership involves the United Nations, Rotary International, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. The effort also involved a huge disease surveillance network to check sewage for the virus and test cases of paralysis. But Pandex says the work is not done.
It's important that community members continue to immunize their children against polio.
That's because polio still exists along the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Until the virus is knocked out of this region, children everywhere still need to be immunized. And children whose immune systems are weak sometimes get a type of polio that's shed from the vaccine into sewage. A different oral vaccine will be introduced next year to prevent this from happening. Dr. Pate hopes lessons learned from the effort to end polio will continue.
I hope that some of those assets that have been deployed in the polio eradication effort will then be used to hold on to the gains that we have made, not only on polio, but on routine immunization, to ensure that every child everywhere in the world is able to be protected from vaccine-preventable diseases.
The polio eradication effort demonstrates two things: that people around the world can come together to accomplish great things, and Dr. Pate says it shows that vaccines work. Carol Pearson, VOA News, Washington.
When Ghana closed schools in mid-March because of the coronavirus, they quickly had to pivot to remote learning using online lessons and educational TV shows. For the youngest learners, Ghana's government has partnered with USAID to provide a radio learning program for millions of students. Stacey Nutt reports from Accra.
In this Accra community, Dora Opey rounds up neighbourhood children to join her for a radio reading program. She says since the program began 2 months ago, her young son's reading has improved. She gathers other children whose parents are working and encourages them to keep learning too.
I look at this long time from March, and we don't know the actual time they will ask them to come to school. So that's why I'm urging them to learn, so that by the time school will open, at least they will know something and read at least.
The hour-long programs are broadcast 6 days a week and rely on learning through play. USAID already had reading programs in Ghana when it joined the government and other partners to offer this radio reading program.
This really is a democratic approach. It gets out to the whole population, because the whole population actually, like 93%, goes to primary school. And this really builds that, presents a way of providing services to a large part of your population.
Ghana's education minister says the program is aimed at kindergarten and primary school children and will continue to be used post-pandemic.
We can have parents using the programs to assist their children at home as well. So the data, the recordings, the resources we are putting, we're digitizing and putting out, it's going to be of tremendous importance to learning in this country.
Technology and learning will require much needed training for teachers, education expert Jonathan Fletcher says.
Hopefully, this situation will help people to learn in different ways, and that will be an additional skill, or people develop expertise in the use of different strategies in teaching.
Fletcher notes that online learning doesn't make up for learning in the classroom, adding that not everyone has access to radios and other devices needed for remote learning. The government says it is working on a safe reopening of schools as soon as possible. Stacey Knott for VOA News, Accra.
Several months into the coronavirus pandemic, doctors are still trying to pinpoint why patients react differently to the virus. For Stephen Donaldson, who survived COVID-19, the battle isn't over as he continues to struggle with some basic functions. VOA correspondent Mariama Diallo reports.
After 13 weeks in a Dallas hospital, Stephen Donaldson is finally going home where neighbors are waiting to welcome him.
It's very humbling. Technically, I shouldn't be here.
But his battle against COVID-19 isn't over.
The dexterity is not easy. None of it's been easy.
It's been harder for Donaldson to recover from COVID-19 because he had an organ transplant 2 years ago and was on immunosuppressant drugs when he contracted the virus. Doctors scaled back on those medicines just enough to allow Donaldson's body to fight back. He was sedated so machines could do the work. Doctors learned more about the virus as they tried to save his life.
The COVID-19 patients, it's a very unique thing, and I think part of that is because it's been such a learning experience for us. It's been such an emotional experience for physicians, just feeling so so unsure of our decision making and having to learn so much so quickly.
You're doing awesome, Stephen. Big tall line.
Doctors say they provided Donaldson with a technique called pruning.
Good job.
That's when patients are kept on their stomachs. Donaldson stayed on his belly up to 16 hours a day at first.
In taking care of Mr. Donaldson, we used some therapies that we very commonly use to treat this type of respiratory distress. So our bread and butter techniques for taking care of patients with pneumonia that progresses this severely include things like turning patients over on their stomachs.
Over time, doctors say his oxygen levels increased and he improved enough to return home. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a look at the partisan divide over racial justice demonstrations in U.S. city streets. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Lynn Ormoudou, your VOA Health correspondent. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there are currently no drugs licensed for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19, and there is no proof that hydroxychloroquine or any other drug can cure or prevent coronavirus. The misuse of hydroxychloroquine can cause serious side effects, illness, and even lead to death. For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Welcome back to Africa 54. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence accepted the nomination for a second term in office as Republicans met for a third day in a mostly virtual national convention. Michael Sullivan reports that amid civil unrest in many American cities, Pence offered an upbeat message with warnings about his Democratic Party opponents.
Pence spoke from Fort McHenry in Baltimore, the symbolically important site of a celebrated 1814 battle.
So with gratitude for the confidence President Donald Trump has placed in me, the support of our Republican Party, and the grace of God, I humbly accept your nomination to run and serve as Vice President of the United States.
There were statements of patriotism and support for frontline officers facing sometimes violent protesters, angry over the deaths of several black Americans during encounters with police.
The violence is rampant. There's looting, chaos, destruction.
A theme repeated through the evening.
I'm talking about the heroes of our law enforcement and armed services. Leftists try to turn them into villains.
The targets of criticism, Democratic Party nominees Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. A veteran policeman says Trump is looking for solutions.
President Trump supports the creation of a national standard for training on de-escalation and communication to give officers more tools to resolve conflict without violence.
Biden has said he does not support demands for police defunding, but wants more funds for community policing and mental health workers.
I don't want to defund police departments. I think they need more help. They need more assistance. And we have to make it clear that this is about protecting neighborhoods, protecting people.
Military veterans who support Trump told their stories. Chinese dissident Chen Guangcheng accused Biden of appeasing the Chinese Communist Party. There was a Trump family member, as on previous evenings during the convention, this time Trump daughter-in-law Lara, and Pence's wife, schoolteacher Karen Pence. Mike Pence said Republicans have a message of hope.
Joe Biden said that we were living through a season of darkness. But as President Trump said, where Joe Biden sees American darkness, we see American greatness.
Trump will take center stage on Thursday for the final night of the Republican convention. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
U.S. President Donald Trump's re-election campaign has made law and order a central theme of this week's Republican National Convention, denouncing racial justice protests as demonstrations by radical mobs. VOA's Brian Padden reports on what Trump supporters see as a growing threat to public safety and why his opponents say Trump is politicizing the crisis.
The Republican National Convention featured a wealthy white couple photographed outside their St. Louis home pointing guns at Black Lives Matter protesters marching through their gated community in June.
Not a single person in the out-of-control mob you saw at our house was charged with a crime. But you know who was? We were. They've actually charged us with felonies for daring to defend our home.
Prosecutors charged the couple with unlawful use of a weapon. The event underscored the Trump campaign's assertion that racial justice protests are spreading and a growing threat to public safety. Just this week, violent protests broke out in Kenosha, Wisconsin, after a white police officer shot a black man near his children on Sunday. Demonstrators looted and set fire to downtown businesses. Early Wednesday, 3 people were shot, 2 fatally. Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has called for police reforms to end what he says is systematic racism. He has also denounced violent protests and opposed efforts to defund police programs. Nevertheless, speakers at the Republican convention have accused Biden and his party of siding with violent radicals and against police to ensure African American support.
They will defund, dismantle, and destroy America's law enforcement. When you are in trouble and need police, don't count on the Democrats.
Law and order has long been a winning issue for Republicans. Richard Nixon won the 1968 election in part by promising to protect public safety as racial and anti-Vietnam protests erupted across the country. However, liberals and Democrats say that Trump, as the sitting president, cannot escape responsibility for current tensions.
He's the incumbent. So if there's chaos going on right now, he's to blame for it. He's not the one who's going to solve it.
Trump has also been criticized for his use of law enforcement. In June, federal officials used pepper spray to forcefully clear peaceful protesters outside the White House. Shortly afterward, Trump emerged from the White House and walked to a church across the street to pose for pictures with a Bible. The president also sent federal forces into other U.S. cities where police have clashed with protesters. Analyst Matt Grossman says Trump's renewed emphasis on law and order overshadows his efforts to reach out to African Americans by touting his economic measures and criminal justice reform.
It really is a big switch here to now go back to your traditional tough on crime, throw away the key kind of position.
While Democrats say Trump's law and order emphasis is an attempt to shift focus away from his administration's failure to contain the coronavirus pandemic, supporters argue it reflects growing public concern over racial unrest in the country. Brian Padden, VOA News, Washington.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.